Today we're going to discuss the thing that connects us all together, the thing that allows you to take a class at home in your pajamas, and the thing that's allowing you to see my face right now. The internet started as something called ARPANET, created by ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, part of the US military. And its goal was to create better communication between the military and different research groups at universities during the Cold War. Now, during the Cold War, we were primarily concerned with Soviet bombs. And so that led to us designing the internet so that no one place could be bombed and take down the entire network. That led to a distributed network. Instead of having one central hub, the internet would consist of nodes spread around geographically with redundant connections between nodes so that if any one connection went down, there'd always be another one, another way of rerouting traffic. And the information, all of the routing information, wouldn't be stored in one location. It would be distributed across many of the different nodes so that if any one node went down, then the information would still be available to the entire network. The idea is that you couldn't take down any one node and take down the entire network. And that's made the internet incredibly resilient, not only to potential bombs, but also to things like internet traffic. Heavy traffic on one particular connection can be rerouted in a different way so that it can still get there fast. If a machine goes offline, it's no problem. The internet can adapt and work around it. So picture, it's 1969. The Beatles have just played their last concert on the roof of their Apple headquarters in London. Woodstock is in full swing, the summer of love. You've got man first landing on the moon. And here in California, a simple message is sent between UCLA and Stanford. The first message sent across a network in history, the birth of the internet. And that first message was LO, L-O. Well, the first word was supposed to be log. It was an attempt to log in. But before the G could arrive at Stanford, the connection crashed and everything went to heck. But the second attempt actually worked and people were able to log in. And thus sort of started our tradition of fixing things by turning it off and turning it back on again. And so from those humble beginnings and a simple message sent from UCLA to Stanford, the internet began to grow. More and more universities took part, and eventually people that weren't universities began to take part, and people saw the value of the internet for things like e-commerce and just personal correspondence, sending email, things like that. Now, the basic shape and structure of the internet is actually much like it was in 1969. Data travels from one place to another, usually between two different machines. One we'll call a client. A client is just a machine that requests services. And a server is a machine that offers those services. So like with email, your email client, your email program, requests email from your email server, which actually handles all of the mail. The data is then sent along data pathways consisting of copper wires, fiber optic cables, and even electromagnetic waves through the air. And the idea is that as it goes along its path, it's guided by machines called routers that connect one network to another. Those routers essentially direct traffic and send stuff from one location to the other using some sort of unique identifier. In order to know where to send the data, each device on the network needs to have some sort of unique identifier. We call that unique identifier an IP address. It stands for Internet Protocol Address. And it's the set of rules that we use for determining where things are and how they get addressed on the internet. It's a lot like a regular address. Right? It helps routers determine where to send the package next. So if your physical address is in Fresno, when the US Postal Service receives a package for you, and they're in Memphis is going to say, well, we need to send this to Sacramento. And from Sacramento, it's going to get sent to Fresno. And from Fresno, it's going to get sent to your house. All of that's determined by your address. Now, those IP addresses are numbers. Usually 4 numbers separated by dots, but we're beginning to switch to a new version. We won't get into that detail here, right? But regardless to say, it's a number. And numbers are really hard for people to remember. And so we created another system, a system that sits on top of the IP address system that makes it easier to use for human beings. And that system's called DNS, Domain Name System. And domain name servers that effectively work that system convert words into the numbers that computers actually use to address devices. And so that means that you don't have to remember a series of numbers to get to your favorite website. You can type in words like Amazon.com. When you do that, that request goes to a DNS server first. The DNS server then converts that into a number that the computer then uses to go find the actual machine somewhere on the internet. It's kind of a convoluted system, but it makes it easy for you to actually use the internet because you can remember Amazon.com. I mean, for instance, if you want to go to our website, fresnocitycollege.edu, you can do that. Or you can actually type in the actual IP address right into the address bar of your browser. I mean, if you try it, open up Google Chrome or some sort of browser and type in 38.106.4.82. It'll take you to the exact same place, right? That's because that's our IP address. But it's really hard to remember that, and you probably wouldn't want to, and so instead, we created the domain name service. Now, as data is actually traveling across the wires, it has to be formatted. And there's lots of different ways to format. We won't get into all of the different details of TCP versus RTP and stuff like that, but all you need to know is that you'll hear a word often associated with the internet. It's called a protocol. A protocol is kind of like a protocol in the military or a protocol for doing anything else. It's a series of rules. Now, these rules are important because as a group, we've sort of adopted them and said, these are the rules for communication. If you format your data in this way, then machine A can talk to machine B, and machine A and machine B can be made by different companies. And that's why you don't have to have a Dell or an HP in order to access the internet. Anybody can create a device that can communicate on the internet. You just have to follow the protocols or the rules. And that's made a huge difference. It's allowed competition, it's allowed for lots of different devices to be able to be used on the internet, including devices we never thought would actually be on the internet, like your television or your smartphone. Although industry groups have gotten together to create these protocols, and so there's lots of rules as to how data travels across the wire. There's very little in the way of regulation as to what sort of information you can send across the wire, right? The content really isn't regulated. And that creates some interesting ideas, and it creates this sort of interesting new space in which to do business and share information. And some of our biggest public policy debates right now are about balancing the idea of freedom on the internet with what's good for the public good. And that makes sense because the internet, despite what you might think, is a public place. And things you do on the internet, you are doing in public. It's not private. Just because you can't see other people doesn't mean that other people can't see you. And that's something that sort of seems lost, I think, with a lot of people, especially young people, who sort of assume that things that they do on the internet are anonymous and private, but they're really not. And things that you say and do on the internet can have a profound impact on you personally. Privacy and security online are very big topics, and so we're going to save those for their own lectures later. But for right now, the loose structure of the internet, that decentralized nature, gives it some unique characteristics. And it makes it so that there are certain things that you should be aware of when using the internet, some best practices, some good ideas to follow. The first one, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is to be careful what you share on the internet. All right, the internet is a public place, and it is very easy to save something or send it to somebody else. When you put something out on the internet, you need to consider it as being permanently out there, right? There's no undo button. There's no way of deleting it or taking that back. And so because of that, things can come back to haunt you. A lot of employers are now considering part of their application process looking at the social media profiles of applicants. So when you apply for a job, they want to check out your Facebook, your Twitter, all of those things. They can search for you and find information like that picture of you doing a keg stand, or that blog post you made that was kind of a rant and you were upset, but it comes across as hateful or insensitive. Those things can affect you. They can affect your employment, they can affect all sorts of things, and there's no real way of taking them back. Okay, now I'm going to bring up a rather sensitive issue, and it's going to seem a bit indelicate. A lot of people are engaging in sexting, right? Taking explicit pictures of themselves and sharing it with other people. But this is digital content, and like I said, it's easy to copy digital content and send it to other people. And so I'm just saying to be very careful with these sorts of images, right? You may trust somebody now, but especially if you're young, you may not feel the same way in 4 or 5 years. Be careful, especially when you're using services like Snapchat that give a sense of safety. Where Snapchat would say, this image will be automatically deleted as soon as it's sent, etc. But you can take screenshots and you can find ways of bypassing that system. And I'm glad to see that now at least Snapchat is telling you that it happened, but once it tells you that it happened, it still happened. And so just be careful what you share with other people. I'm not saying don't do it. This is college. You're all adults, right? You can make a decision ahead of time. I'm just saying you should be aware of the consequences of that decision before you make it. And spoilers for our security lecture. If you're storing sensitive material online, it's a really good idea to choose incredibly good passwords and to be very careful about the security questions you choose for password recovery. Now, the second big thing I want to talk about is that nobody actually controls the content on the internet. Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing. It used to be that media moguls and publishers, they would act as filters, right? They would decide who got to print a book or who got to be on television. And because of that, there was sort of this filter of acceptable information. There was some vetting process, right? Where you checked to make sure that something was true before you put it on air. The information we got was it was pre-filtered for us. We didn't have to think too much about it. It was easier to trust that information. But now you're the one responsible for filtering out all that information. It's your job to sort of do your due diligence to figure out, is this source credible? Is this something that I should believe? The best rule of thumb is to just be skeptical about things you see or read or hear on the internet. I'll give you an example. Pretty much every year on Facebook, I see some post about, it's a special alignment of some planets, and if you look up in the night sky tonight, you're going to see that Mars is actually larger than the moon, all right? And I've seen that shared however many times, and it's a complete hoax. It's a total lie. There's no way that that could ever be true. And in fact, if you ever see Mars in the sky larger than the moon, you should probably call your parents to tell them that you love them, because it's one of the last things you're ever going to do. Finally, there is so much information out on the internet that sometimes it can lead to information overload. It can be really hard to find the information that you actually need because there's just so much information out there, right? And part of being tech savvy is being able to actually navigate all of that information, to use tools to be able to grab the information that you need when you need it. It's not just about term papers and figuring out who was the 8th president of the United States, right? It's about finding what good ramen shops are there in Fresno right now. Search engines like Google and Bing send out web crawlers, programs that navigate the web and find all sorts of different pages, right? And then it takes those pages and it gathers information about the content on those pages, so that when you type in a set of search words, let's say ramen and Fresno, it's going to try and find web pages that involve both of those words. And it's going to order them in terms of what it thinks you're going to most want to actually see. And it does this using a special algorithm that, how many links are possibly going to that page and a bunch of stuff that we won't cover right now. But needless to say, that ordering is really important. And there's a whole branch of business called search engine optimization that essentially is just telling you how to build your website so that it gets better results on Google when people search for something like ramen and Fresno. But ignoring that for right now, for you get this list of results and you can go and click on the page and hopefully it's got information that you want, maybe leading you to a great ramen shop here in Fresno. If what you want is a great bowl of noodles, maybe searching the internet for web pages that involve the words ramen and Fresno isn't the actual best solution. Maybe you want to go to a place where people are gathering to give their opinions and take pictures of food and share ideas about restaurants, right? Tools like Yelp or Food Spotting, places where people are putting in information that you can then search to try and find that. It may actually be a lot faster to use Yelp to find a great ramen shop in Fresno than it is to use Google. And that's just because of the types of information that get put in. Now, granted, Google can also send you Yelp results because Google's web crawlers will crawl the Yelp sites. But regardless of how you do it, it's just a matter of getting to the information that you need. And crowdsourced information, like the kind you'd find on Yelp or on Food Spotting, can be a really great tool, even if it's just for a lifestyle issue like great noodles. In fact, one of my favorite tools to use on the internet, and something that a lot of students don't know about, is Wolfram Alpha. Wolfram Alpha works a little bit differently than Google, although it looks kind of similar when you go to the website. What it does is, instead of sending out a web crawler to get information about web pages, they go to credible sources, take information, and just put the information into a database that you can then search using different commands. And so the idea is that instead of, if I wanted to know who won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1977, right? If I did that in Google, I would get a set of pages, and I could click on one of those pages, and in that page would probably be the answer that I was looking for. Whereas Wolfram Alpha just says, well, we're trying to understand that information so we can understand your question, and we're just going to tell you the answer. The answer is Annie Hall, directed by Woody Allen, right? It just gives you the answer as opposed to sending you to a page that may contain the answer. And because of that, it allows you to do stuff with the information. To say, what's the net worth of, or the market cap of Apple versus the market cap of Google, right? And it will show you a ratio of those two numbers because they're numbers and you can do math. In fact, Wolfram Alpha can actually act as a graphing calculator. If you don't have a graphing calculator for your course, you could just use Wolfram Alpha. In fact, it'll give you a lot of information that may be considered cheating by your math instructor. So definitely be careful when you're using Wolfram Alpha. But the idea is that it has so much information and it just gives you the answer. It's sort of a different way of searching for stuff. And there are times where you're better off using Google. And there are times where you're better off using a tool like Wolfram Alpha. The idea is to know what you need and be able to search for it using the correct tool when you can. Now, with a topic as big as the internet, there is a lot of other things that we could talk about. And we will in future lectures. We'll talk about privacy and security and a bunch of other topics related to the internet. But hopefully this gave you sort of a basic understanding of the history, structure, and some general guidelines for using the internet. So explore all the internet can do for you. It's great at doing some things and terrible at others. It's a great way to connect people together, and it's a terrible way of keeping things private, right? But if you know that ahead of time, and if you're aware, you'll be able to use the internet in a way that will give you the most benefit. And at the end of the day, it's not so bad to be able to take a class at home in your pajamas.